the screech of brakes, the smell of burning rubber, the wild eyes of a homeless man pressed against my windshield, his weathered hands splayed like desperate spiders against the glass. "Don't take that car. Don't go there." His voice cut through the morning air like a rusty blade, and something inside me shattered. Not broke, shattered. Like ice hitting concrete at full speed. My name is Emily. I'm 27 years old, and that was the exact moment my blood froze in my veins, a complete stranger warning me not to attend my own grandfather's will reading. A man who smelled like rain and regret somehow knew more about my destination than I wanted to admit to myself. That was the moment I realized danger sometimes comes disguised as family secrets. The kind that eat you alive from the inside out, leaving nothing but hollow bones and bitter memories. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in the United Kingdom, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in Australia, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The homeless man stepped back, his warning hanging in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. I sat there, engine idling, hands trembling on the steering wheel, wondering how a stranger could see the poison I'd been drinking for months. Wondering how he knew I was driving toward my own destruction. But I was already destroyed, wasn't I? Had been for 8 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. Not that I was counting. Not that I carved those numbers into my soul every morning when I woke up on someone else's couch, staring at someone else's ceiling, breathing someone else's air. The fallout. That's what everyone called it. Like I was some kind of nuclear disaster that had contaminated everything within a 50-mile radius. Like I was the problem. Like I was the one who'd torn the family apart with my bare hands and scattered the pieces across 3 counties. My tiny apartment, if you could call 400 square feet of peeling wallpaper and broken dreams an apartment, smelled like damp carpet and failure. The kind of smell that gets into your clothes, your hair, your skin. The kind that follows you around like a guilty conscience, whispering reminders of everything you've lost. Cold noodles for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Ramen noodles that tasted like cardboard and broken promises. I'd sit on my secondhand couch, donated by a neighbor who pitied me more than she liked me, and stare at the wall where family photos used to hang. Now there were just nail holes. Tiny wounds in the drywall that matched the ones in my chest. The neighbors whispered. Oh, how they whispered. Their voices carried through paper-thin walls like poison gas, seeping into every corner of my existence. She lost everything after the fallout. Used to drive a BMW. Now she takes the bus. I heard her parents won't even say her name anymore. Serves her right. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. But they didn't know. They didn't know about the feeding. About the way my family's love came with strings attached, puppet strings that they pulled whenever they wanted me to dance. They didn't know about the suffocation disguised as affection, the control masked as care. Walking past expensive family cars parked near my building was like walking past gravy ones. Each Mercedes, each Lexus, each perfectly waxed reminder of the life I'd been exiled from. The life that had never really been mine to begin with. I'd just been borrowing it, like everything else in that golden cage they called home. The smell of damp carpet clung to me like a second skin. The sound of silence in an empty room kept me awake at 3 in the morning, staring at shadows that looked too much like the ghosts of everything I'd lost. Or maybe everything I'd finally let go of. Some nights, I couldn't tell the difference. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Not because of money, though that was tight enough to strangle, but because dreams had become a minefield. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. Disappointed. Angry. Righteous in their indignation. My mother's perfectly manicured fingers pointing at me like loaded weapons. My father's silence, which cut deeper than any words ever could. The couch surfing phase lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of sleeping on friends' sofas, pretending I was just between places instead of between lives. 3 weeks of overstaying my welcome everywhere I went, watching patience turn to annoyance, watching sympathy turn to burden. Sarah's couch first. My college roommate, who tried to hide her relief when I finally left. Then Mike's spare room, where I slept surrounded by boxes of his ex-girlfriend's belongings, another exile, another refugee from love gone wrong. Finally, Janet from work, who let me crash for 5 days before gently suggesting I might want to look into more permanent arrangements. Permanent arrangements. Like I was furniture that needed storing. The tiny apartment came with a view of the dumpster behind Wong's Chinese restaurant. The same dumpster where I sometimes found myself standing at 2 a.m, wondering if this was rock bottom or if there were deeper places to fall. The smell of MSG and desperation wafted up through my window on hot summer nights, mixing with the scent of my own defeat. I'd press my face against that window and watch the city below, all those lights in all those windows, all those lives continuing while mine had ground to a halt. Each light was someone else's story, someone else's family dinner, someone else's belonging. I was just darkness looking in. My reflection in that window became my only companion. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under eyes that had seen too much truth too fast. Hair that I'd stopped caring about somewhere around month 4. Clothes that had been expensive once, now hanging like rags on a frame that was slowly disappearing. The shower in that apartment barely worked. Water that came out lukewarm on good days, ice cold on most others. But I'd stand under that pathetic drizzle and let it wash away whatever dignity I had left, because at least the water moving across my skin felt like something. At least it was sensation. At least it was proof I was still alive. Grocery shopping became an exercise in mathematics and humiliation. Counting quarters, reading every price tag twice, putting back anything that wasn't absolutely necessary for survival. The checkout clerk's pitying glances burned like acid. The way other customers moved around me, like poverty might be contagious. I started avoiding mirrors. All of them. The one in my bathroom, the ones in store windows, the ones in other people's houses. Because the woman looking back wasn't anyone I recognized. She was a stranger wearing my face, living my life, breathing my air. She was everything I'd become and nothing I'd ever wanted to be. The worst part wasn't the poverty. It wasn't the loneliness or the fear or the constant ache in my chest that felt like someone had reached inside and torn out something vital. The worst part was the doubt. The voice in my head that whispered late at night, telling me I'd made a mistake. Telling me I should crawl back, apologize, beg for forgiveness for crimes I'd never committed. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe family came first, always, no matter what they asked of you. No matter how they treated you. No matter how much of yourself you had to sacrifice on the altar of their expectations. But then I'd remember. I'd remember the last conversation, the words that had cut so deep they'd severed every connection I'd thought was permanent. I'd remember the choice they'd given me, be who they wanted me to be, or be nothing to them at all. I'd chosen nothing. And nothing was exactly what I'd become. The phone call came on a Tuesday. Tuesday, September 10th, at exactly 2:47 in the afternoon. I know because I was staring at my phone, counting the minutes until I had to leave for my shift at the coffee shop where I made barely enough to keep the lights on. The number wasn't in my contacts, but something about it looked familiar. Official. Legal. The kind of number that either brings very good news or very bad news, with nothing in between. Emily Harrison? The voice was crisp, professional, completely at odds with the chaos of my life. Speaking. My voice came out rougher than I expected. I hadn't spoken to another human being in 3 days. This is David Richardson from Richardson, Coleman and Associates. I'm calling regarding your grandfather's estate. My grandfather. James Harrison. The man who'd built an empire with his bare hands and a vision that everyone else called impossible. The man who died 6 months ago, while I was persona non grata, exiled from even his funeral. I think you have the wrong number, I said, though something cold was spreading through my chest. I'm not part of that family anymore. Miss Harrison, you need to come to your grandfather's while reading. You're in it. The phone slipped in my hands. Actually slipped, like my palms had suddenly forgotten how to grip anything solid. The room tilted, walls shifting like I was on a ship in rough seas. That's impossible. I have the will right here, Miss Harrison. Your name is listed specifically. James Harrison was very clear about your inclusion. But my parents, the family. I thought they cut me off forever. Family dynamics and legal documents are two very different things, Richardson said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. According to this will, you have a legal stake in Harrison Industries. A significant stake. The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing harder than the last until I was doubled over on my cracked linoleum floor, phone pressed to my ear like a lifeline. How significant? I think this conversation would be better had in person. Can you be here Thursday at 2 p.m.? Thursday. 2 days away. 2 days to process the fact that the very people who'd pushed me away, who'd made me feel like garbage unworthy of their family name, now needed something from me. Now needed my signature on papers that could change everything. Miss Harrison? Are you still there? I'm here. Should I put you down for Thursday? Yes. The word came out strangled, like it was fighting its way past everything lodged in my throat. Yes, I'll be there. I hung up and sat on my floor for an hour. Just sat there, back against the refrigerator that hummed too loud and worked too little, staring at nothing and everything at once. A legal stake. In Harrison Industries. The company my grandfather had built from nothing, the company that was now worth more money than I could count. The company that my parents had expected to inherit in its entirety, dividing it among themselves and my siblings like a birthday cake. But I was in the will. Me, the exile, the black sheep, the daughter they'd erased from family photos and family memories with surgical precision. My grandfather had remembered me. Even after the fallout, even after I'd been declared dead to them, he'd remembered me. The tears came then. Not the gentle kind that cleanse and heal, but the violent kind that tear you apart from the inside out. I cried for the grandfather I'd never said goodbye to. I cried for the months of believing I was truly alone. I cried for the relief that felt like drowning in reverse, like finally breaking the surface after being underwater for so long I'd forgotten what air tasted like. But underneath the grief and relief was something else. Something darker and more powerful than anything I'd felt in 8 months. It was anger. Pure, crystalline anger that cut through the fog of my depression like a blade through silk. They needed me. After everything they'd done, everything they'd said, everything they'd made me believe about myself, they needed me. The phone started ringing almost immediately. First my mother's number, then my father's, then my brother's. Then all of them again, in rotation, like some kind of desperate carousel of guilt and manipulation. I watched each call go to voicemail. Watched their names light up my screen like warning signals, like danger approaching. And for the first time in 8 months, I had power. Real power. The power to choose whether or not to answer. I chose not to. The voicemails started piling up. I didn't listen to them, but I could see the increasing frequency, the growing desperation in the very fact that they kept calling. These were people who hadn't spoken my name in public for months, who'd told extended family that I was going through a phase or needed time to find myself. Now they needed me to find myself quickly, preferably by Thursday at 2 p.m. Wednesday morning brought text messages. A whole flood of them, each one more revealing than the last. Mom, we need to talk. Dad, this is important, Emily. Brother, don't be dramatic. It's family business. Sister, stop ignoring us. This affects everyone. Mom again, we know you're angry, but this is bigger than personal feelings. The messages kept coming, escalating in tone and desperation as the hours passed. Don't be stubborn, this is family. We can work through our differences. You're being childish. This isn't just about you. And finally, the truth, delivered in a text from my father that was so honest it was almost refreshing. If you don't show up, we'll lose everything. Everything. Not some things. Not part of the inheritance. Everything. Which meant my stake wasn't just significant. It was crucial. Maybe even controlling. I screenshot that text message and stared at it for a long time, savoring the taste of irony. For 8 months, I'd been the one who'd lost everything. I'd been the one scrambling, begging, trying to survive on nothing while they lived in their mansion and drove their luxury cars and attended their charity galas. Now they were afraid of losing everything. Now they knew what it felt like to stand on the edge of an abyss and wonder if the ground beneath their feet was solid or just an illusion that could crumble at any moment. I still didn't call them back. Wednesday evening, my phone rang with an unknown number. When I answered, it was Richardson, the lawyer. "Ms. Harrison, I wanted to check in before tomorrow. Are you planning to attend?" "I'm planning to attend." "Good. And Ms. Harrison? I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I think you should know you hold more power than you think." "What do you mean?" "Your grandfather was very specific about the terms of his will. Very specific about what happens if certain beneficiaries choose not to participate. I think you'll find tomorrow's meeting quite enlightening." He hung up before I could ask for clarification, but I didn't need it. I could read between the lines. I could see the shape of what my grandfather had done, the trap he'd set for a family that had forgotten what loyalty meant. Sometimes silence is the loudest weapon. I was learning that lesson in real time, watching my family's desperation grow with each unanswered call, each ignored text. They'd taught me the power of exclusion. Now I was teaching them the power of choice. Tell me, have you ever ignored a call on purpose just to make someone sweat? Be honest in the comments. And if you're listening silently, at least subscribe. Don't ghost me too. Thursday morning arrived like a judgment day. I woke up before my alarm, heart pounding with anticipation and dread in equal measure. The woman in the mirror looked different. Not healed, that would take time, but stronger. Focused. Ready for war. I dressed carefully. Not in the expensive clothes I'd once taken for granted, but in the best of what I had left. Black pants that still fit properly. A white blouse I'd managed to keep wrinkle-free. Shoes that had seen better days, but still looked professional under artificial light. It wasn't armor, but it would do. The law office was downtown, in one of those glass towers that scraped the sky and reflected nothing but their own importance. I'd been here before, years ago, when grandfather had updated his will the first time. Back when I was still golden, still the favored granddaughter who could do no wrong. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to heaven or descending to hell. I couldn't decide which. The reception area was all marble and mahogany, the kind of calculated luxury that whispered money in several different languages. The receptionist smiled at me with professional warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Emily Harrison for the 2 p.m. appointment." "Of course. Mr. Richardson is waiting for you in conference room A. Your family is already here." My family? The phrase hit me like a slap. After 8 months of being a stranger, of being erased, of being nothing, suddenly I was family again. How convenient. I followed her down a hallway lined with portraits of distinguished-looking men in expensive suits. They all looked like they'd never doubted themselves for a single moment, never questioned whether they deserved the air they breathed. They looked like everything I'd been raised to become, and everything I'd failed to be. Conference room A was enormous, dominated by a table that could have seated 20 people comfortably. At one end sat my family, mother, father, brother, sister, arranged like a tribunal waiting to pass judgment. At the other end sat a man I assumed was Richardson, surrounded by legal documents that would determine the rest of all our lives. When I walked in, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. My mother looked older. Not aged gracefully, but worn down, like fabric that had been washed too many times in water that was too hot. My father's face was stone, but I could see the desperation behind his eyes. My siblings shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet my gaze. "Emily." My mother's voice was carefully neutral, like she was addressing a business associate rather than the daughter she'd given birth to 27 years ago. "Mother." I took a seat across from them, putting the width of the table between us like a moat around a castle. It felt appropriate. Richardson cleared his throat. Now that everyone is here, we can begin. James Harrison was very specific about how he wanted this will to be read. Very specific about the order and the conditions. He opened a leather folder and pulled out several documents. First, the personal bequests. To my son Robert and daughter-in-law Margaret, I leave the family home and all its contents. My parents exhaled slightly. The house was worth millions, but it was also just a house. The real prize was yet to come. To my grandchildren Michael and Sarah, I leave the sum of $500,000 each to be distributed on their 30th birthdays. My siblings had the grace to look pleased. $500,000 was nothing to sneeze at, even if they had to wait a few years to get their hands on it. And now we come to the primary bequest. Harrison Industries, with all its assets, properties, and subsidiaries. The room held its breath. This was it. This was what they'd all come for. The company that was worth everything, that represented decades of blood, sweat, and ambition. Harrison Industries is to be divided as follows: 40% to Robert Harrison, 40% to Emily Harrison. The silence was deafening. I felt like I'd been struck by lightning, every nerve ending in my body suddenly alive and screaming. 40%. Not a token amount, not a consolation prize. 40% of everything. And the remaining 20%? My father asked, his voice carefully controlled. Richardson consulted his papers. The remaining 20% is to be held in trust, with the decision-making power resting jointly with Robert and Emily Harrison. All major business decisions require unanimous agreement between these two parties. Unanimous agreement. Which meant either of us could veto anything the other wanted to do. Which meant we had to work together, or nothing moved forward at all. There's more, Richardson continued. James Harrison included a specific clause regarding family unity. If any beneficiary contests this will or attempts to exclude any other beneficiary from their rightful inheritance, they forfeit their entire share. The implications hit the room like a bomb. If my parents tried to cut me out again, they'd lose everything. If I decided to shut them out completely, they'd have nothing. We were bound together now, whether we liked it or not. But there was something else. Something in Richardson's tone that suggested he wasn't finished. Additionally, if Emily Harrison chooses not to accept her inheritance within 30 days of this reading, her share reverts to the trust, with control passing to her children or designated heirs. However, the 40% share itself remains in her name permanently, unavailable to any other beneficiary. Which meant they couldn't wait me out. They couldn't pressure me into giving up my share and then claim it for themselves. If I walked away, the 40% would sit there forever, earning money that I could claim at any time, but that they could never touch. My grandfather had been a genius. A vindictive, brilliant genius who'd seen exactly what kind of people his son and daughter-in-law were. Who'd known they'd try to manipulate and control and exclude. Who'd built a trap so perfect they'd walked right into it with their eyes wide open. There's one final condition, Richardson said, and I could see sweat beading on my father's forehead. Emily Harrison is to be offered a formal apology from the family and an invitation to Sunday dinner within 7 days of this reading. The invitation must be extended in person and accepted graciously. Failure to comply results in forfeiture of inheritance for all parties. My mother's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the way her face went pale. My father's hands clenched into fists on the table. My siblings looked like they'd been slapped. They had to apologize to me. They had to invite me back into the fold they'd cast me out of. They had to swallow their pride and admit they'd been wrong. And if they didn't, they'd lose everything. If I'd been a different person, I might have felt sorry for them. If I'd been the woman they'd raised me to be, I might have graciously accepted their forced apology and pretended the last 8 months had never happened. But I wasn't that person anymore. 8 months of exile had burned away everything soft and forgiving inside me. 8 months of believing I was worthless had crystallized into something harder than diamond and twice as sharp. "Do you have any questions about the terms of the will?" Richardson asked. "Just one," I said, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "When do I need to give my answer about accepting the inheritance?" "You have 30 days from today." "But, Emily." He looked directly at me. "I knew your grandfather for 20 years. He was counting on you to make the right choice. Not just for yourself, but for the legacy he built." The right choice. As if there was only one option that counted as right. As if duty and family and blood were more important than dignity and self-respect and the truth. My parents were staring at me across the table, and I could see the calculations running behind their eyes. How to apologize without meaning it. How to invite me back without actually wanting me there. How to manipulate this situation to their advantage while complying with the letter, if not the spirit, of my grandfather's final wishes. "I need time to think," I said, standing up from the table. "You have my number. When you're ready to extend that invitation, you know how to reach me." "Emily, wait." My mother's voice cracked slightly, the first real emotion I'd heard from her in over a year. "We should talk about this. As a family." I paused at the door, hand on the handle, and looked back at them. Really looked. At the woman who'd taught me to tie my shoes and braid my hair, who'd also taught me that love came with conditions and family was a privilege that could be revoked. At the man who'd carried me on his shoulders and cheered at my soccer games, who'd also looked me in the eye and told me I was no longer his daughter. At my siblings, who'd chosen their parents' approval over their sister's survival. "We haven't been a family for 8 months, I said quietly. "I'm not sure an inheritance changes that." I walked out while they were still processing my words, leaving them to figure out how to clean up the mess they'd made of all our lives. The elevator ride down felt different this time. Lighter. Like I was shedding weight with every floor I descended. By the time I reached the lobby, I was practically floating. I had power now. Real, legal, unshakable power. The kind that came with signatures on documents and percentages that couldn't be argued away. The kind that meant I never had to beg for anything ever again. But more than that, I had choice. For the first time in my life, I could choose whether or not to be part of this family. I could choose whether to accept their apology or reject it. I could choose whether to forgive them or make them live with the consequences of their actions. The choice was mine. Finally, completely, irrevocably mine. Would you forgive them at this point, or let them suffer? Subscribe if you'd never let them use you again, and if you disagree, comment below why. Walking out of that building into the afternoon sunlight felt like being reborn. The city looked different, brighter, more welcoming, full of possibilities instead of obstacles. The same streets I'd walked in defeat just hours earlier now stretched out before me like a red carpet. My phone started buzzing before I'd even reached my car. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails piling up like snow in a blizzard. The desperation was immediate and complete. But I didn't answer. Not yet. Let them stew. Let them panic. Let them feel what it was like to need something from someone who had every reason to deny them. I drove back to my tiny apartment, but even that looked different now. The peeling wallpaper seemed charming rather than depressing. The view of the dumpster felt like a reminder of where I'd been, not where I was stuck. Everything was temporary now. Everything was by choice. The messages kept coming. I let them pile up like evidence, like a paper trail of their desperation. "We need to talk urgently. This affects the whole family. Don't make any hasty decisions. We can work through this together." And then, as the hours passed and I continued to ignore them, the tone began to shift. "We know you're angry, but this is bigger than personal feelings. You're holding the family hostage. This isn't what grandfather would have wanted. Don't be spiteful." Spiteful. The word made me laugh out loud, alone in my apartment. As if spite was what drove me, rather than justice. As if 8 months of exile and humiliation and desperation were just personal feelings to be set aside for the greater good. The greater good had never included me. Why should I include it now? Friday brought a different kind of message. A formal invitation, hand-delivered by a courier service, written on the expensive stationery my mother saved for special occasions. Mr. and Mrs. Robert Harrison cordially invite Emily Harrison to join them for dinner on Sunday evening at 6 o'clock. We look forward to discussing recent family matters and moving forward together. Cordially invite. Recent family matters. Moving forward together. Every word chosen carefully, legally safe, giving away nothing that could be used against them later. There was no apology in the invitation. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing. No admission that they'd treated me like garbage and left me to survive on my own. Just the bare minimum required by the will, wrapped in formal language that meant nothing and everything at once. I set the invitation on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. 7 months ago, receiving an invitation to Sunday dinner at my childhood home would have been the answer to every prayer I'd whispered into the darkness. I'd have sobbed with relief, grateful beyond words to be welcomed back into the fold. Now it felt like an insult. A slap in the face disguised as an olive branch. But it was also an opportunity. A chance to see them on their home turf, to watch them squirm as they tried to pretend the last 8 months had never happened. A chance to make them work for something they'd always taken for granted. I RSVP'd with a single word, accepted. Saturday night, I went shopping. Not to the thrift stores and discount outlets I'd grown used to, but to the kind of boutique I'd once considered beneath my notice. I couldn't afford much, but I could afford one outfit that would remind them exactly who they were dealing with. Black dress. Simple, elegant, expensive enough to make a statement without being flashy. Shoes that clicked authoritatively on hard surfaces. Jewelry that caught the light at just the right angles. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I hadn't seen in months. Not the broken, desperate woman who'd begged for forgiveness and acceptance. Not the exile who'd worn shame like a second skin. This woman looked like she owned the world, or at least her corner of it. This woman looked dangerous. Sunday evening arrived with all the fanfare of an execution. I drove slowly through the familiar neighborhoods of my childhood, past houses that had always seemed too big and too perfect, past lawns that had always been too green and too carefully maintained. The family estate sat at the end of a circular driveway like a monument to success and tradition. Georgian columns, ivy-covered walls, windows that reflected nothing but their own importance. It was beautiful in the way that museums are beautiful, impressive, untouchable, cold. I'd lived here for 18 years. I'd run through these halls, climbed these stairs, hidden in these rooms when I was scared or sad or overwhelmed. But standing in front of it now, I felt like a stranger looking at someone else's life. The front door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there in her Sunday best, smile perfectly arranged, hands clasped in front of her like she was posing for a family portrait. Emily, thank you for coming. Not welcome home. Not we've missed you. Just thank you for coming, as if I were a business associate arriving for a professional meeting. Which I supposed I was. The house smelled exactly the same, expensive candles, fresh flowers, the faint scent of money that clings to everything in houses like this. But it felt different. Smaller somehow, despite its obvious grandeur. Less important than it had seemed when I was younger and more impressed by things that could be bought. They were all waiting in the dining room. Father at the head of the table in his traditional spot, siblings arranged on either side like courtiers attending their king. The table was set with the good china, the kind that came out for holidays and special occasions. Apparently, my return from exile qualified as special. Emily. My father stood when I entered, extending his hand for a formal handshake. Not a hug. Not even a pat on the shoulder. A handshake, like I was a stranger being introduced at a business function. I shook his hand and felt nothing. No warmth, no familiarity, no echo of the man who'd once taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my math homework. Just flesh and bone and the absence of everything that mattered. Please sit. My mother gestured to a chair that had once been mine, Back when I had a place at this table, back when I belonged in this family. It felt like wearing a costume that no longer fit properly. Dinner was awkward in the way that only family dinners can be. Polite conversation about safe topics. Questions about my job, my apartment, my health, all delivered with the careful tone of people walking through a minefield. Nobody mentioned the 8 months of silence. Nobody acknowledged the elephant in the room that was growing larger and more obvious with every passing minute. The food was perfect, of course. Roast beef cooked exactly right, vegetables that had been steamed to mathematical precision, wine that cost more than I made in a week. Everything designed to impress, to remind me of what I'd been missing, what I could have again if I just played along. But I wasn't hungry. Not for food, anyway. So, my father said finally, setting down his wine glass with the kind of deliberate motion that announced a shift in conversation. I suppose we should discuss Thursday's meeting. Should we? I took a small bite of perfectly seasoned potatoes. I thought this was just a family dinner. It is, my mother said quickly. But we are family, and this affects all of us. Family. There was that word again, deployed like a weapon whenever they needed something from me. Emily, my brother said, leaning forward slightly. I think we all need to acknowledge that the last few months have been difficult. Difficult. I repeated the word like I was tasting it, testing its flavor. Is that what we're calling it? There were misunderstandings on all sides, my sister added. Things were said that maybe shouldn't have been said. Things were said, I agreed. Let me see if I can remember some of them. You're no longer part of this family. Don't contact us again. You've made your choice, now live with it. Do those ring any bells? The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Tick, 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 counting the seconds of their discomfort. We were all emotional, my mother said finally. It was a difficult time. It was a difficult time for you? The words came out sharper than I'd intended, cutting through the polite veneer like a knife through silk. Really? Because I seem to remember being the one who lost everything. I seem to remember being the one who spent 8 months wondering if I'd ever see any of you again. You chose to leave, my father said, his voice carefully controlled, but with an edge underneath. You made that decision. I chose to stand up for myself. You chose to cut me off for it. You were being unreasonable. I was being honest. We stared at each other across the table, and I could see the exact moment he remembered that I held 40% of everything he cared about in my hands. Could see him force his expression back to neutral, swallow whatever he'd been about to say. The point is, my mother said, stepping into the breach like a diplomat trying to prevent a war, we're family. Family is forever, Emily. We work through our problems together. Family is forever, I repeated. Unless you do something that disappoints them. Unless you refuse to be who they want you to be. Unless you have the audacity to think for yourself. That's not fair, my sister said. Fair. I set down my fork and looked around the table at these people who shared my blood, but felt like strangers. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been a phone call during those 8 months. Fair would have been checking to make sure I was okay. Fair would have been treating me like a human being instead of a problem to be solved. We needed time to process, my brother said weakly. You needed time to process. I needed my family. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to burn. I could see them all calculating, trying to figure out how much ground they needed to give to get what they wanted. You're right, my mother said finally, and the admission clearly cost her. We could have handled things better. We should have reached out sooner. Should have. I nodded slowly. But you didn't. We're reaching out now, my father said. Because you need something from me. Because you're our daughter, my mother corrected, but there was no conviction behind the words. Just calculation disguised as emotion. I looked around the table one more time. At the people who'd raised me, shaped me, loved me conditionally. At the siblings who'd chosen their parents' approval over their sister's well-being. At the family that had taught me that belonging was a privilege that could be revoked at any time. I need to ask you something, I said quietly. And I want an honest answer. If grandfather hadn't left me 40% of the company, would I be sitting here right now, The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could see the truth in their faces, in the way they couldn't meet my eyes, in the way my mother's perfectly manicured fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass. "Emily," my father began. "Would I be sitting here right now?" I repeated. "That's not a fair question," my mother said. "It's the only question that matters." More silence. The grandfather clock kept ticking, marking time that couldn't be taken back, words that couldn't be unsaid, choices that couldn't be undone. "We're here now," my sister said finally. "Isn't that what matters?" "No," I said simply. "It's not." I stood up from the table, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Thank you for dinner." It was illuminating. "Emily, wait." My mother rose too, desperation creeping into her voice for the first time all evening. "We haven't finished talking." "Yes, we have." "You can't just leave." "We need to discuss." "You need to discuss how to convince me to give you what you want," I interrupted. "I need to decide whether or not to let you." "This is family business," my father said, his careful control finally slipping. "You can't hold the entire family hostage because your feelings are hurt." "My feelings are hurt?" I turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw a stranger wearing my father's face. "Is that what you think this is about?" "Hurt feelings." "What else would it be about?" "Respect. Dignity. Being treated like I matter. Being valued for more than what I can give you." "You do matter," my mother said desperately. "You're our daughter. When it's convenient. When you need something. When there's money involved." I walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the marble foyer with the kind of authority I'd never felt in this house before. Behind me, I could hear them scrambling, chairs scraping, voices rising. "Emily, please. We can work this out. Don't make any decisions tonight. Just think about what grandfather would have wanted." I stopped at the front door and turned back one last time. They were clustered in the doorway to the dining room, looking smaller somehow than they had when I'd arrived. Diminished. Desperate. "You want to know what grandfather would have wanted?" I said. "He would have wanted his family to love each other unconditionally. He would have wanted his children and grandchildren to support each other through anything. He would have wanted us to be the kind of family that doesn't disown their own daughter because she disagrees with them." "We didn't disown you," my mother protested weakly. "What would you call it then?" She had no answer. None of them did. "I'll be in touch," I said, and walked out into the night air that felt cleaner than anything I'd breathed in months. Behind me, the door closed with a sound like finality. Like the end of one story and the beginning of another. If this line hit you in the gut, subscribe right now. And if you won't, at least admit in the comments why you'd stay silent when truth needs a voice. The drive home should have felt like victory. I'd walked into their domain, held my own, made them face the truth of what they'd done. I'd shown them that I wasn't the broken, desperate woman they'd left behind 8 months ago. But victory felt hollow when it came at the cost of everything you'd once believed in. I sat in my tiny apartment afterward, still wearing my expensive dress, still feeling like I was wearing a costume that didn't quite fit. The formal invitation lay on my kitchen counter where I'd left it, looking innocent and mundane. Just paper and ink. Nothing that suggested it had the power to destroy everything I'd thought I knew about family. My phone was buzzing again. More messages, more calls, more desperate attempts to reach me. But their frequency was different now. Less demanding, more pleading. The power dynamic had shifted, and we all knew it. The next few days passed in a blur of legal consultations and financial planning. Richardson walked me through the implications of my inheritance, the responsibilities that came with owning 40% of a multi-million-dollar company. Board meetings I'd be expected to attend. Decisions I'd need to make. A whole world of corporate politics and family dynamics that I'd been insulated from my entire life. "Your grandfather was very smart about this," Richardson told me during one of our meetings. "He's essentially forced your father to work with you or lose everything." "But Emily," he leaned forward, his expression serious. "This is a two-way street. You need them as much as they need you." "Do I?" 40% gives you significant power, but not absolute control. If you want to make changes, implement new strategies, take the company in new directions, you'll need your father's cooperation. Or at least his grudging compliance. And if I don't want to take the company in new directions? What if I just want to collect my dividends and leave the day-to-day operations to them? That's your choice. But I knew your grandfather well enough to know he didn't leave you this inheritance so you could be a silent partner. He left it to you because he believed you could make a difference. Make a difference. The phrase echoed in my head as I walked home that afternoon. What kind of difference? And to whom? To a family that had shown me exactly how much I was worth to them? To a company built on traditions that didn't include me until money was involved? The local newspaper ran a small item about the will reading on Wednesday. Nothing detailed, just a brief mention that James Harrison's estate had been settled and his business interests distributed among family members. But in a town this size, where everyone knew everyone else's business, it might as well have been front-page news. The whispers started immediately. I could feel them when I walked down the street, when I bought groceries, when I sat in the coffee shop where I still worked my shifts. People looking at me differently, reassessing everything they thought they knew about the Harrison family drama. I heard she got everything. 40%, from what I understand. Makes sense. She was always his favorite. Must be nice, getting rich off family guilt. Family guilt. As if my grandfather had left me his fortune out of pity rather than love. As if 40% of a company was compensation for 8 months of exile rather than recognition of something deeper. But maybe that was all it was. Maybe I was reading too much into a decision made by a dying man who'd felt bad about the way his family had treated his granddaughter. Maybe this wasn't about justice or love or legacy. Maybe it was just guilt, wrapped up in legal documents and tied with a bow. Thursday brought news that changed everything. Richardson called me at work, his voice tight with something that might have been excitement or concern. Emily, you need to come to my office immediately. There's been a development. What kind of development? The kind that's better discussed in person. Can you be here in an hour? I left work early, telling my manager I had a family emergency. Which was true in a way. Everything about my family had been an emergency for months now. Richardson's office felt different this time. More charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. He had documents spread across his desk, and his usually calm demeanor was replaced by something that looked almost like anticipation. Sit down, Emily. There's something I need to tell you about your grandfather's will. Something I wasn't authorized to reveal until certain conditions were met. What conditions? Your family's response to the inheritance. Specifically, whether they attempted to welcome you back or continued to treat you as an outsider. I felt cold suddenly, like someone had opened a window in the middle of winter. What are you saying? Your grandfather was very specific about this. He included provisions in his will that were contingent on your family's behavior over the first week following the reading. I've been documenting everything. The formal invitation, the dinner, the tone and content of their communications with you. Documenting for what purpose? Richardson pulled out a sealed envelope, my grandfather's handwriting clear on the front, to be opened only if Emily is treated as a stranger in her own family. He knew, I whispered. He knew exactly how they'd react. Your grandfather was many things, Emily, but naive wasn't one of them. He'd watched his son and daughter-in-law for decades. He knew exactly what kind of people they were, and he planned accordingly. He opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is a codicil to the will. A secret provision that changes everything we discussed last week. My hands were shaking as I reached for the document. The words blurred together at first, legal language swimming in front of my eyes like alphabet soup. But slowly, the meaning became clear. If Emily Harrison is not welcomed back into the family with genuine warmth and affection, if she is treated as a means to an end rather than a beloved daughter and granddaughter, if her return is contingent solely on financial considerations, then the distribution of assets shall be revised as follows. I had to read it 3 times before the full implications sank in. 60%, I said, my voice barely a whisper. 60% to you, Richardson confirmed. 20% to your father. The remaining 20% split equally between your siblings. But only if they can prove they've genuinely reconciled with you within 6 months of the will reading. And if they can't prove that, then the siblings get nothing. Your father keeps his 20%, but only as long as he maintains a respectful working relationship with you. The moment he steps out of line, attempts to undermine you, or treats you as anything less than an equal partner, his share reverts to you as well. That would give me 80%. Controlling interest. Complete control of Harrison Industries. I sat back in my chair, stunned. My grandfather hadn't just set a trap for my family. He'd built an entire maze of consequences, each one triggered by their own actions, their own choices. He'd given them every opportunity to do the right thing, and when they'd failed, when they'd proven they were exactly who he'd feared they were, he'd made sure I had the power to build something better. There's more, Richardson said gently. Your grandfather left you a letter. Personal this time, not legal. He wanted you to have it if things went the way he expected them to. The envelope was smaller this time, my name written in the careful handwriting I remembered from birthday cards and Christmas notes. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered with words that felt like a final conversation with the only person in my family who'd ever really understood me. My dearest Emily, it began. If you're reading this, then I was right about your parents, and I'm sorrier than you can imagine. I'd hoped they would surprise me. I'd hoped that losing you would teach them what really mattered. But I was a businessman long enough to know that hope is not a strategy. You were always different from the rest of them. Kinder. More honest. More willing to fight for what you believed in, even when it cost you everything. Those qualities made you a target in this family, but they'll make you a leader in the world. I'm giving you the tools to build something better than what I left behind. Use them wisely. Use them with the compassion your parents never showed you. Use them to create the kind of family you deserve to have. And Emily, never let anyone make you feel like an outsider again. You belong wherever you choose to stand. All my love, grandfather. The tears came then. Not the angry, bitter tears I'd cried so many times over the past 8 months, but something cleaner. Grief for the grandfather I'd lost, relief for the validation I'd never expected to receive, and something that might have been hope for the future I could now build. What happens now? I asked Richardson when I could speak again. Now you decide what kind of person you want to be, and what kind of family you want to have. The local news picked up the story Friday morning. Not the financial details, those were private, but the broader strokes. Harrison Industries ownership in dispute. Family feud over multi-million-dollar inheritance. Local heiress battles for control of family company. Heiress. The word looked strange in print, attached to my name like a title I'd never earned. But I supposed I had earned it, hadn't I? 8 months of exile had been my qualification. 8 months of learning who I was when I had nothing had been my training. My family's desperation reached new heights. The calls came hourly now, the messages growing more frantic by the day. But the tone had changed again. Less demanding, more pleading. They were starting to understand that they weren't dealing with the broken woman they'd cast out 8 months ago. Please call us back. We need to talk about this situation. We're still family, no matter what's happened. Don't let money destroy our relationships. Don't let money destroy our relationships. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Money had always defined our relationships. Love in my family had always come with a price tag. Acceptance had always been conditional on compliance. I was just the first person honest enough to admit it. Saturday brought an unexpected visitor. I was cleaning my apartment, not because it needed cleaning, but because I needed something to do with my hands while my mind processed everything that had changed when someone knocked on my door. It was my brother, Michael. Standing in my hallway looking uncomfortable and out of place, like an expensive suit that had been tailored for someone else. Emily. Can we talk? I let him in mostly because I was curious to see what approach he'd take. The apartment looked even smaller with him in it. his presence filling the space in a way that made the walls seem to close in. "Nice place," he said, though we both knew it wasn't. "It's honest," I replied, which is more than I can say for most of the places I've lived. He winced at that. Good. I wanted him to feel uncomfortable. I wanted him to see what 8 months of their family's love had looked like from the inside. "Emily, I want you to know that I never wanted things to go this far. But you didn't stop them either." I was caught in the middle. "No, Michael. You were caught between doing what was right and doing what was easy. You chose easy." He sat down on my second-hand couch without being invited, the way he'd always done. In our childhood, it had been endearing. Now it felt presumptuous. "I know you're angry." "I'm not angry anymore." Anger was what I felt for the first few months. What I feel now is something else entirely. "What?" Clarity. We sat in silence for a moment, and I could see him struggling with something. Some internal battle between the person he'd been raised to be and the person he might want to become. "The family is falling apart," he said finally. "The family fell apart 8 months ago. You're just noticing now because there are financial consequences. That's not fair." "Fair." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about fair?" Fair would have been one phone call. One text message. One sign that you cared whether I was alive or dead. We knew you were alive. Did you? Did you really? Because I spent some nights wondering if I'd wake up the next morning. I spent some nights sitting on my fire escape wondering if anyone would even notice if I didn't. His face went white. "Emily, don't. Don't you dare look shocked. Don't act like you had no idea what you were putting me through. You all knew exactly what you were doing. We thought you'd come back. We thought you'd apologize and everything would go back to normal." Normal. I tasted the word like poison. Normal was me being a puppet. Normal was me doing whatever you all wanted, whenever you wanted it, without question or complaint. Normal was me having no voice, no opinion, no value beyond my usefulness to the family. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. And the moment I tried to be something else, you cut me off. He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands like they might have answers written on his palms. When he looked up, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine emotion. Real regret. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time since this whole mess started, someone in my family sounded like they meant it. "I'm really, genuinely sorry. Not because of the money. Not because of the inheritance. Because I failed you as a brother, and I know it." The apology hit me like a physical blow. I'd been armored against their manipulation, their calculated attempts to win me back. But honest regret? Real acknowledgement of what they'd done? I wasn't prepared for that. "Why no?" I asked quietly. "Why are you here now, saying this now?" "Because I've been thinking about what kind of person I am. What kind of brother I am. And I don't like the answers." "The money has nothing to do with it?" "The money made me realize how badly I'd screwed up. But it's not why I'm sorry." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception, for the calculated expressions I'd learned to recognize over the years. But all I saw was exhaustion and something that looked like shame. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly. "Any of you. I'm not asking you to. Not yet. I'm just asking you to know that at least one person in this family realizes how wrong we were. 1 person out of 4 isn't great odds. It's a start. Maybe it was. Maybe one genuine apology was worth more than a dozen calculated ones. Maybe real regret was the foundation that relationships could be rebuilt on, if both people were willing to do the work. But I wasn't sure I was willing. 8 months of exile had taught me that I could survive without them. Had taught me that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, more resilient than I'd ever been given credit for. Did I really want to risk that newfound strength on people who'd already proven they couldn't be trusted with my heart? "I need time," I told him. "I know. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to please everyone else. I know. And I need to decide whether this family is worth saving." He flinched at that, but he nodded. "I know." After he left, I sat in my apartment feeling more confused than I had in months. Anger was clean. Anger was simple. You knew where you stood with anger, knew what you were fighting against and why. But forgiveness was messier. Forgiveness required you to believe that people could change, that relationships could be rebuilt, that love could survive betrayal. And I wasn't sure I believed any of that anymore. Tell me, have you ever ignored a call on purpose just to make someone sweat? Be honest in the comments. And if you're listening silently, at least subscribe. Don't ghost me too. The news of my increased inheritance broke on Monday morning. Someone had leaked the details of the will's conditions to the press, and by noon the story was everywhere. Local woman inherits controlling interest in family company. Grandfathers will punish his family for disowning heir. Harrison Industries under new management. The phone calls from reporters started immediately. Everyone wanted to know how it felt to go from exile to heiress in the span of a week. Everyone wanted the inside story on the family feud that had made millionaires out of spite and revenge. I didn't talk to any of them. Let them speculate. Let them write their stories based on rumors and gossip. The truth was mine to tell or keep, and I wasn't ready to share it with the world. But the business calls were different. Lawyers, accountants, investment advisors, all suddenly very interested in being my friend. All suddenly very eager to help me manage my newfound wealth and power. Ms. Harrison, we'd love to discuss your investment strategy. Ms. Harrison, we specialize in family business mediation. Ms. Harrison, we understand you'll be taking a more active role in company operations. Ms. Harrison. Not Emily. Not the broken woman who'd served coffee and counted quarters for 8 months. Ms. Harrison, who commanded respect because she commanded assets. It was intoxicating and nauseating at the same time. My parents' attempts to reach me became increasingly desperate as the week progressed. Gone were the demands and ultimatums. In their place were pleas that sounded dangerously close to begging. Emily, please. We need to discuss this as a family. We know we made mistakes. Let us make it right. Don't let strangers tear our family apart. Your grandfather wouldn't want this. Your grandfather wouldn't want this. That line made me laugh every time I heard it. My grandfather had orchestrated this entire situation. He'd planned every detail, anticipated every move, built every consequence into his final gift to me. If anything, he'd wanted exactly this, for them to face the reality of what they'd lost when they'd lost me. Tuesday brought another unexpected visitor. This time it was my sister Sarah. But she didn't come to my apartment. She came to the coffee shop where I was working, walking in during the afternoon lull, like she was just another customer. Can I get a large cappuccino? She asked, as if we were strangers. As if she hadn't watched me make her coffee 1,000 times growing up. I made her drink in silence, going through the familiar motions while she stood there looking uncomfortable in her expensive clothes. When I handed her the cup, she didn't leave. Emily. Sarah. Can we talk? We're talking. Privately. I looked around the empty coffee shop. My manager was in the back doing inventory, and there were no other customers. We were as private as we were going to get. What do you want to say? I want to apologize. For what, specifically? She blinked, like she hadn't expected me to ask for details. Like a generic apology would be enough to wash away 8 months of silence. For not standing up for you. For choosing their side instead of yours. Their side, I repeated. What was their side, exactly? Emily. No, I'm genuinely curious. What was the side you chose? What was the position you supported when you decided to cut me out of your life? She fidgeted with her coffee cup, steam rising between us like a wall. They said you were being ungrateful. That you were trying to tear the family apart. And you believed them. I didn't know what to believe. So you chose to believe the people who'd never been anything but loving and supportive of your choices? She flinched. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Sarah. That's the point. We stood there in silence, surrounded by the smell of coffee beans and the hum of espresso machines. In the background, I could hear my manager moving boxes, the sound of a business continuing to function despite the personal drama playing out in its front room. I miss you, she said finally, and her voice cracked on the words. I miss my sister. The admission hit me harder than I'd expected. For all the anger and hurt and betrayal, Sarah and I had been close once. We'd shared secrets and inside jokes and the kind of bond that comes from growing up in the same house, breathing the same air, surviving the same parents. I missed you too, I said quietly. For months, I missed you so much it felt like I was missing a limb. And now? Now I've learned to live without that limb. I've learned that I'm whole all by myself. Emily, we're family. Family. I shook my head. You all keep saying that word like it means something. Like blood and shared DNA are enough to excuse any behavior, forgive any betrayal. It does mean something. What does it mean, Sarah? Because from where I'm standing, family means conditional love. Family means you're welcome as long as you do what you're told. Family means your value is determined by your usefulness. That's not what family means to me. Then why did you let them kick me out of yours? She had no answer for that. No defense that could bridge the gap between what family was supposed to mean and what it had actually meant in our house for the past 8 months. The inheritance doesn't matter to me, she said, changing tactics. I don't care about the money. Doesn't it? Because you're here now, having this conversation now. You weren't here 2 weeks ago when I had nothing. I was scared. Of what? Of choosing wrong. Of making things worse. Of losing everyone if I picked the wrong side. So you chose to lose me instead. I thought you'd come back. I thought this was temporary. You thought wrong. I turned away from her then, busying myself with cleaning equipment that was already clean. She stood there for a few more minutes, sipping her cappuccino and probably trying to figure out what else to say. What magic words might undo 8 months of damage with a single conversation? Emily, she said finally. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for another chance. A chance to be the sister I should have been from the beginning. Why no? Because I finally understand what we lost when we lost you. And I understand that it wasn't about money or business or family politics. It was about love. And we failed at the most basic part of loving someone. Which is what? Being there when they need you most. I turned back to look at her, this woman who shared my face and my childhood and half my DNA. She looked older than she had 8 months ago. Worn down in a way that expensive clothes and professional makeup couldn't hide. I can't promise to forgive you, I said honestly. I can't promise that we'll ever be what we were before. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking for a chance. A chance to do what? To prove that family can mean something better than what we've shown you. Maybe it could. Maybe people could change, relationships could heal, love could survive betrayal and neglect and the kind of damage that left scars on your soul. Maybe the word family could mean something other than conditional acceptance and calculated affection. But maybe was a dangerous word. Maybe led to hope, and hope led to disappointment, and I'd had enough disappointment to last several lifetimes. I'll think about it, I told her. That's all I can ask for. After she left, I stood alone in the coffee shop and wondered if I was making a mistake. Not in refusing to immediately forgive them, but in even considering it. I'd built a life without them. A small life, maybe, but an honest one. A life where I knew exactly where I stood with everyone in it. Did I really want to risk that for the possibility of something better? Did I want to open myself up to the people who'd already proven they could hurt me in ways I'd never imagined possible? The answer, I realized, wasn't about them at all. It was about me. About what kind of person I wanted to be, what kind of life I wanted to live. Did I want to be defined by what they'd done to me, or by what I chose to do next? The court hearing was scheduled for Friday. Not a trial. The will was clear and legal and uncontestable. But a formal reading of the updated terms, a judicial confirmation of the inheritance distribution, a legal stamp on the new reality. I dressed carefully that morning. Not in the expensive clothes I'd worn to Sunday dinner, but in something that felt more like me. Professional, but not flashy. Confident, but not arrogant. The outfit of someone who belonged in a courtroom not because she was fighting for something, but because something already belonged to her. The courthouse was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate. There were reporters outside, cameras and microphones, and people who wanted to turn my family's private drama into public entertainment. I walked past them without stopping, without commenting, without giving them the sound bites they were fishing for. Inside, my family was already seated. All of them, arranged in a row like defendants waiting for sentencing. They looked smaller in the courthouse than they had in their own dining room. Less important. More human. The judge was a woman about my mother's age, with kind eyes and the sort of presence that commanded respect without demanding it. She looked over the documents with the careful attention of someone who understood that lives hung in the balance of legal language. "This is an unusual case," she said, addressing the room. "Not because of the amounts involved, but because of the conditions attached to the inheritance." James Harrison was very specific about his intentions and very clear about the consequences of certain behaviors. She looked directly at me. "Miss Harrison, do you understand that by accepting this inheritance, you're taking on significant responsibilities? Not just financial, but ethical." "I understand, Your Honor." "And do you feel prepared for those responsibilities?" Did I? 6 months ago, I would have said no. 6 months ago, I was still the woman who'd been raised to defer to others, to seek approval before making decisions, to value keeping peace over telling truth. But 8 months of exile had burned away that woman. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that she could survive anything, someone who'd discovered that her own opinion was the only one that really mattered. "I believe I am, Your Honor." She nodded and turned to my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, do you understand that the conditions of this will are now in effect? That your continued inheritance depends on your treatment of your daughter and your willingness to work with her as an equal partner." My father's jaw was so tight I thought it might crack. "We understand." "And do you have any objections to the terms as outlined?" "No objections," my mother said quickly, before my father could answer. Smart woman. She knew they were in no position to object to anything. "Very well." The judge picked up her gavel. "By the power vested in me by the state, I hereby confirm the terms of James Harrison's last will and testament as amended by the codicil dated 6 months prior to his death. Ms. Emily Harrison is now the majority shareholder of Harrison Industries, with all rights and responsibilities thereof." The gavel came down with a sound like finality, like the end of one story and the beginning of another. "Ms. Harrison," the judge said, addressing me directly, "you now have something most people never get, the power to choose what your family becomes. Use it wisely." Outside the courthouse, the reporters were waiting. This time I stopped. "Ms. Harrison, how does it feel to inherit a controlling interest in your family's company?" "Ms. Harrison, what are your plans for Harrison Industries?" "Ms. Harrison, how has this inheritance changed your relationship with your family?" I looked at the cameras, at the microphones pointed at me like weapons, at the faces of people who wanted to turn my pain into their profit. And I realized I had something to say after all. "My grandfather left me more than money," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "He left me the power to choose what family means. Not the family you're born into, but the family you build. Not the love you inherit, but the love you earn." What does that mean for Harrison Industries? It means the company will be run by people who understand that business isn't just about profit. It's about treating people with dignity and respect. It's about creating something worth more than the money it generates. "And your family?" I looked over at them, standing a few feet away, listening to every word. "My family has the opportunity to prove that they understand what love really means. We'll see if they take it." I walked away then, leaving them to deal with the reporters and their questions. I had more important things to do than explain my choices to strangers. I had a life to build and a future to create and a company to run according to values that actually meant something. The call came that evening. Richardson, sounding excited in his careful, professional way. "Emily, I thought you should know Harrison Industries stock price went up 12% today. Apparently, investors like the idea of new leadership." "Interesting. There's something else. Your father called my office this afternoon." He wants to schedule a meeting to discuss company operations. A real meeting where you're treated as an equal partner. And I think he's finally starting to understand that this isn't temporary. That you're not going anywhere, and neither is your controlling interest. Good. Schedule the meeting. Emily? Richardson's voice was gentler now. Your grandfather would be proud of you. The way you've handled this whole situation, the dignity you've shown, he would be very proud. After I hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment and looked around at the life I'd built from nothing. The second-hand furniture, the view of the dumpster, the walls that had witnessed my breakdown and my rebuilding. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Honest and real and earned through survival rather than inheritance. Soon, I'd be able to afford something bigger. Something better. But I thought I might stay here a little longer. Not because I couldn't leave, but because I chose not to. Because this place had taught me who I was when everything else was stripped away. My phone buzzed with a text message. From Michael. Thank you for giving us a chance to be better. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Don't thank me yet. Show me. I will. Maybe you would. Maybe they all would. Maybe family could mean something different than what I'd grown up believing. Maybe love could exist without conditions, acceptance without compliance, belonging without sacrifice. But even if they couldn't change, even if they proved to be exactly who they'd always been, I'd still win. I'd won the right to choose my own path, to define my own worth, to build my own version of family from people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could give them. I walked to my window and looked out at the city below. All those lights, all those lives, all those stories continuing despite my personal drama. But tonight, my story felt different. Tonight, I wasn't just darkness looking in. Tonight, I was light looking out. The homeless man's warning echoed in my memory. Don't take that car. Don't go there. He'd been wrong about the immediate danger, but right about the deeper truth. I shouldn't have gone there as the person I was, broken, desperate, willing to accept any scraps of affection they threw my way. But I'd gone there as the person I'd become, strong, self-possessed, unwilling to settle for less than I deserved. And that had made all the difference. They'd called me a stranger. Now I finally was one by choice. A stranger to their version of family, their definition of love, their conditions for belonging. But I wasn't a stranger to myself anymore. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was and what I was worth. And it turned out I was worth a hell of a lot more than they'd ever given me credit for. What would you have done in my place? Comment below. And if you can hear this story and still not subscribe, then at least tell me why in the comments. Silence helps no one. The sun was setting outside my window, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to define what family meant and what love looked like and what legacy was worth building. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged. In a life I'd chosen, surrounded by a future I had the power to shape, holding the keys to a kingdom I'd inherited not through blood or luck, but through surviving everything they'd thrown at me and coming out stronger on the other side. They'd tried to break me. Instead, they'd made me unbreakable. And that, I thought, was the best revenge of all.